Hey, good morning and happy Easter. I have a question for you. What does this receipt have anything to do with Easter? You'll find out in a few minutes. Hey, good morning everyone and happy Easter. Thanks for tuning in today. As you can see right here, I have a receipt in my hand, which is typically used for what? It shows proof that I bought something. But what about our faith? What's our proof there? It's not so much in the fact that Jesus died on the cross, but rather it is in the empty tomb. The empty tomb solidifies our faith and demonstrates that Christ was who he claimed to be. And just like the receipt gives proof, the fact that the tomb was empty also gives us proof and assurance. Today we're going to be looking at three things in our study. One, that the stone was rolled back and the tomb was laid open. Also the fact that the tomb itself was empty of Jesus' body and that the grave cloths were lying there. In our text this morning, which will be John chapter 20, verses 1 through 9, we're going to be looking at Jesus' tomb and how it was found empty on that first day of the week. Here's a 1-minute little instrumental clip that I think sets the stage for today's lesson. And as it is instrumental, if you want to mute it or fast forward, that's up to you. If you mute it, you can watch the words.
God had a plan from the very beginning for you and me to be with him. Sin has a way and sin separates you and me away from him. The cross is where his love poured out, but the story wasn't over yet. There's an empty grave. Death was defeated. Jesus is alive. Shout it to the sky. He's alive. He's alive. He's alive, he's alive. Yeah. He's alive, he's alive.
He's alive. Hallelujah. He's alive because God raised him from the dead and the stone was rolled back and the tomb was found empty. You know, as we get into our text, let's dive into it by looking at John chapter 20, verses 1 through 9. And it reads this way. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. Now on that morning, the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene, a follower of Jesus, went to the tomb. And in Luke's account, it records two additional women, Joanna and Mary, the mother of James. And when she arrived with the others, the stone that had sealed the tomb was rolled back, and the tomb was empty. Tombs of that day were generally carved out of a hill or out of a cliff, and were about 4 feet high or so, and they would put a big stone in front of it in order to help seal it. And in order to make sure it was more secure, they would put straps across the front of a stone in the form of an X. And then a wax seal would be placed in the middle of that X. You know, so how was that tomb empty? Maybe it was a human act. Maybe it was the disciples. Maybe it was common Jews. Maybe it was the guards who were there that night. Or maybe it was supernatural. Well, let's look a little bit at that in Matthew chapter 27, 62 through 66. The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to see Pilate. "Sir," they said, "we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days, I will rise again.' So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal the body, and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. And this last deception will be worse than the first." "Take a guard," Pilate answered. "Go make the tomb as secure as you know how." So they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting the guard. Now from this text, it had become common knowledge that he would rise again in 3 days. Reference verse 63 by what we just read. And Jesus also announced this when he paralleled his rising again with Jonah being in the belly of the fish for 3 days, from Matthew chapter 12, 38 through 40. Now I would think that many people knew this, as when Jesus makes this claim, I'm sure it spread all throughout the countryside. But also skeptics are going to be skeptical. And if the Jews would have taken the body, it really would have stopped Christianity before it even started. And therefore, the faithful followers who were hopefully anticipating Jesus to rise in 3 days would have been looking forward to this time. But however, we also read that it was ordered that the tomb was to be guarded until that time, in verses 64 through 66. And so Pilate ordered that the tomb be secure and that it be sealed. It would have been virtually impossible for the disciples to have been able to take the body. So our conclusion is that it couldn't have been the disciples or even the common Jews, because the seal was on the tomb and the guards would have punished them if they would have tried to break that seal. Well, what about the Roman guards? Matthew chapter 28, 11 through 15. This is the text just after what we just read from the previous text. And it reads this way. While the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. Notice in verse 13 that the guards make the excuse that they were asleep when someone came to take the body. Now, I don't know about you. If you are asleep, you really cannot know what's going on. And so if you wake up and see what's going on, then obviously you're no longer asleep. So how could someone roll that huge stone away, take the body, and then re-roll it back in place without waking up any of those guards? Seems kind of virtually impossible. We also see that they were bribed in verse 15. You know, to me, a person's credibility drops when they're bribed. Bribery basically means that they are lying. So the conclusion that we can see from this is that the guards couldn't have taken the body because they would have been punished severely by the government. And which one of them really wants to have that happen? So from all this, we see that the facts point to the supernatural. But what about the grave cloths lying there? Well, John records that the grave cloths were lying there in the tomb. The idea of lying there indicates that they were not disturbed, thus something would have had to pass through them. Again, think about if someone were trying to make sure and not to wake the soldiers, and yet they took the body. Do you think that they would take time to make sure all those cloths were neatly put back in place? I really seriously doubt it. I think whenever you take something, you're in a hurry, you're wanting to get in and out of there as fast as you can. Plus, the constant wrap around the body also would have made it very tough for anyone of a normal person to be able to escape, let alone someone who had been beaten as much as Jesus was. And so without a doubt, the conclusion is simple. He arose. So as we wrap this up, I want to tell you a story that is one of my favorites to tell around Easter time, as it illustrates so much of what we've been talking about. A story about a young man named Philip. As he was 9 years old, but he was in a Bible class of 8-year-olds. And sometimes 8-year-olds can be kind of cruel. Those third graders that were in there, they didn't welcome Philip. It wasn't because Philip was older, but rather it was because Philip was different. Philip suffered from Down syndrome, and also all the obvious manifestations that come along with that. The slow responses, the facial characteristics, and the symptoms of intellectual disability. The Sunday before Easter, the Sunday school gathered some of the eggs, kind of like this, that would open up in the middle. And then he told all the different students that they were going to go outside and they were going to discover for themselves different things that demonstrated new life to them, and they were to place it inside this egg. And so then they would go out and they would look for different things, and they would put it inside the egg. And so as they did that, they came inside after they put all their things inside their egg, and they put all their eggs on the table. And one by one, the teacher opened them up. And the first one had a butterfly in it. And all the people oohed and awed over the beautiful butterfly. And for some, it's kind of hard to say beautiful sometimes when you're 8 years old. And inside the other one was just a gorgeous flower. And again, all the students oohed and awed over the beauty that flower displayed. But then one person put in a rock. And the children laughed at the fact that there was a rock in there, saying, "That's crazy. How's a rock supposed to be like new life?" And immediately the boy who put the rock inside said, "That's mine. I knew everybody would put things like butterflies and flowers and things like that, but I just wanted to put a rock in there to be different." And everyone laughed because of it. But then the teacher opened the last one, and inside of it, there was nothing. Nothing was inside of it. And so someone said, "That's not fair." Another one said, "That's dumb." But the teacher felt a tug on the shirt. And it was Philip's. Philip hadn't put anything in there. And Philip said, "I have new life because the tomb is empty." And the class fell silent. And from that day on, Philip now became a part of the group. They welcomed him. Whatever had made him different before didn't make any difference whatsoever right now. But Philip's family knew that because of his symptoms and because of his situation, he wasn't going to have a long life. Just too many things caused problems in his body. And that summer, overcome with infection, Philip passed away. And on the day of the funeral, 9 8-year-old boys and girls confronted the reality of death and marched up to the front of the church, not with flower, but 9 children, along with their Sunday school teacher, placed on the casket an empty plastic egg, because to them, that's what Philip stood for, as he showed them what new life was all about. The fact that the tomb was empty, and the fact that his egg was empty. You know, an empty egg, a receipt, both which demonstrate proof. You know, Jesus' empty tomb was also something that demonstrated the ultimate proof that he is alive and that he is who he claimed to be. And so let's exclaim that with our actions, maybe even with our speech. He is alive. Hey, thank you for tuning in today, and happy Easter.